Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm John Isaacs, Vice President of Government Affairs at the Portland Business Alliance, Greater Portland's Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us this morning for our first election Q&A panel. We are so glad we can continue to be a resource by bringing our community together online for important conversations like this. We encourage you to continue to be safe, stay home, and stay healthy. Thank you to our members working in essential roles on the front line of this outbreak. Also, thanks to many of our members who have answered the call to help support our community in countless ways. The Portland Business Alliance is here to be a resource for our community. Visit portlandalliance.com/COVID-19 for the latest business and public health resources, and follow us on social media for updates. A recording of this presentation and links for all the resources mentioned will be available on our website later today. This morning, we are holding a two-part discussion with candidates who are running for Portland City Council Commissioner number 2. We split this into two one-hour sessions so that each candidate has enough time to share their thoughts. We'll pause briefly in between the two sessions. You'll be able to stay online or log in again using the same link. With ballots out this week for the May 19th primary, we are excited to be providing this opportunity for our community to hear from those who are running for the City Council position recently vacated with the passing of Nick Fish. Today we'll discuss topics such as rebuilding and economic recovery in light of the COVID-19 outbreak, what these candidates hope to do to foster public-private partnerships, and ways they plan to keep Portland a thriving and affordable city for all those who live and work here. With that, I'd like to welcome our Session 1 candidates, Cynthia Castro, Sam Chase, and Loretta Smith. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Each candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce themselves. Then I will ask a few questions. We will start in alphabetical order and then rotate after that. So we're going to start with Cynthia Castro. Please start by telling us about yourself and why you are running for Portland City Council. If elected, what would be your top priorities in the seat?
Sure. Well, first I want to thank Portland Business Alliance and your members for stepping up during this crisis to support our community by raising relief funds, donating personal protective equipment, participating on the Mayor's Economic Recovery Task Force, and more. I believe in collaboration and public-private partnership because we are stronger together. So a little bit about me. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest and have a background as a researcher looking at minority health disparities and poverty alleviation. I earned a master's in public health from Oregon State University while also serving as a coach for the Beavers women's cross country and track programs. After moving to Portland because of my husband's cancer research job with OHSU, I worked for Sport Oregon, formerly the Oregon Sports Authority, under former COO Meyer Freeman. And for the past 6 years, I've proudly served our community as a former Portland Parks and Recreation employee, including as the director of the Charles Jordan Community Center, as well as a senior policy advisor for Commissioner Amanda Fritz. I'm running for Portland City Council because I want to ensure that all Portlanders have stable housing, economic security, clean air, and water. I also want to protect the things that make Portland special, like our award-winning parks and recreation system, small businesses, and creative community. I want to focus on safety. I know safety means different things for different people. We need policies and programs that address safety no matter who you are or where you live. And I want to change city systems and structures that have perpetuated inequities. I will work alongside communities to create policies and programs that meet their unique needs. And I'm also running because we need a city council that is more reflective of the community we serve. Along the campaign trail, I've heard from people of color who have thanked me for running, for being courageous enough to run. I'm mentoring students of color who now believe they can work in government. And when I was a young child, the words city commissioner and campaign were not in my vocabulary, but that won't be the case for my kids. Thank you again for having me. I look forward to the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. Okay, Sam Chase.
Thank you, Sam Chase, running for Portland City Council as well. I thank you for hosting this forum, and I've always followed my heart to where I can have the greatest impact. And our city right now really needs some experienced leadership to really take care of getting this city, rebuilding our economy and stimulating our economy to get past this COVID pandemic and get us through this pandemic and really build our economy so that we can pay for all of the services that we need as a city to move forward. We absolutely need to address our affordable housing crisis and restore our parks to the gem that they need to be, to address our congestion and traffic in a way that reduces our carbon footprint as well, and to reform our city council form of government. I have been involved in community and public service for a long time. I started building affordable housing as a nonprofit executive director, and really saw how much of an impact we can have when we give people the tools to succeed. We don't do it for them, but we create those tools for them. And I helped a family go from homelessness to home ownership in just 2 years, going through the process, getting back to work, and getting into home ownership. So we can be successful when we give people the tools. We didn't do that for this family. We gave them the tools to do it. And I've really been working to bring that success to an economy of scale for many tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of families since that time. I brought my experience to reform our urban renewal, to really address displacement. I brought it to, that's why Nick Fish brought me on as his chief of staff, to help him build his affordable housing strategy. I went to Metro to really bring poverty as a part, addressing poverty as a part of our growth management strategy, was able to persuade Metro Council and the region and the agency to put forward an affordable housing bond measure in partnership with the Portland Business Alliance, and get that to happen. And now we are not just addressing affordable housing, the region's challenge in Portland, we're doing it all through the region, in Clackamas County, in Beaverton and Hillsborough. They're saying, you're not gonna tax us and spend those dollars in Portland. You're gonna build affordable housing here in Hillsborough. You're gonna build it in Beaverton. You're gonna build it in Clackamas County. We're moving forward with a regional homeless and housing service initiative. Those are the kinds of things that I'm gonna bring to City Council: collaboration, bringing people together, getting the best possible outcomes that we can get for our city on those priorities that I'm really hyper-focused on. And it starts with rebuilding and stimulating our economy so that we can do all this other work. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sam. And then we'll have our final opening statement from Loretta Smith.
Thank you, John. I'm running because I believe that Portland needs a leader who understands that so many of our neighbors are falling behind. And this is actually before the pandemic happened. And I have a record of getting things done for the most vulnerable of our constituency here in Portland. Portland has been a place where you could raise a family, send a kid to college and save for retirement. But actually, that's not true anymore. It wasn't true before the pandemic. And so that's why I have always talked about poverty, making sure that we end widespread poverty in every corner of this city. I think that when we speak to poverty, we're going to be speaking to folks who are unemployed, underemployed, who are self-employed, who don't have quite the necessary resources to make it, and folks who are homeless on our city streets. I'm the only candidate in the race with a consistent record of working for social services and understanding infrastructure. In my past, I worked for Senator Wyden for 20 years. And as you know, John, we did appropriations, and we did that with Senator Smith, Senator Merkley, and I have a good grasp of where the dollars are. I understand what questions to ask and when to ask those questions. So for me, this is just a continuation of making sure that the most vulnerable people in our city, that they get a chance to really have an opportunity to thrive.
Okay, thank you for those opening statements. Okay, we're going to go on to our next question, and this question will start with you, Sam. And we're going to ask you about housing and homelessness. There's a few questions here, and you can address all in one answer. Each year, the Portland Business Alliance conducts polling and economic research on how our region is doing. This year in our poll, 41% of voters named housing and homelessness as their top priority. And obviously this poll was conducted before we entered the COVID-19 crisis. Economic research also showed that 46% of renter households are cost burdened, meaning they're spending more than 40% of their monthly income on rent, and 25% of homeowners in Portland are actually cost burdened. We know that the number of Portland area residents experiencing or threatened with homelessness is likely to rise as the extent of the economic toll of coronavirus becomes more apparent. If you are elected as Portland City Commissioner, how will you address housing and homelessness? Are there any particular policies and programs that you support that address homelessness and the housing shortage? Please let us know your position on the Metro Homelessness Services measure and any other actions you think you would like to take to jumpstart housing and tackle homelessness on the City Council.
Thank you for this question. This is absolutely critical priority for our city and for our region, and really including our region to address this is a important part of that strategy. And I really appreciate the Portland Business. I want to say this, before I start, I really appreciate the Portland Business Alliance participation in addressing these challenges and making really difficult calls, like putting forward a regional bond measure for affordable housing, like putting forward the current initiative that is on the ballot. Absolutely support it. I'm working on the campaign to promote it. Of course, I was part of putting it on the ballot as a Metro councilor and making sure that we fully funded the need so that we can truly address this challenge. And I think the next step is to say, we've got the resources. It's time to stop talking about the resources and actually put some accountability, transparency, efficiency in the work and the programs that we are putting on the ground. And that's where the difficult work is going to happen. And it's about identifying the programs and the housing strategies that are really, truly effective and making difficult decisions about that. Day one, I want to convene leaders from around our city, from the business community, from community leaders, elected leaders, culturally specific community leaders, to come together, housing provider, to come together and really identify what are the most effective strategies from the city's perspective we can be pushing forward. One of those areas is around the cost of housing, and we've absolutely got to address the supply side. We cannot subsidize our way out of the housing crisis. We absolutely have to for those very low incomes, but we've got to support the market to free up the permitting process, to reduce the cost of construction for building out the supply. PBA rightly, thank you for pointing out that we are falling 20% behind every year on growth versus the amount of housing that we're producing. So we've got to look at the policies that we have in place that are stifling development. We've got to advance things like residential infill in the right way to put density in along our corridors, build infrastructure in Albina Vision area and other areas where we can take on significant supply of affordable housing. We need to look at street response and other programs that get people off the street and paired housing with support services that will get folks that will be successful in staying out of homelessness, and really the economy wins because we'll also be addressing a lot of our livability issues that we absolutely need to address to keep Portland's brand strong, to keep tourism coming to our region. And so it benefits all of us when we make the investments to get people out of homelessness and onto and into permanent housing where they can be successful, and shelter.
Great, thank you, Sam. Loretta. We are having we cannot hear you, Loretta, so the mute button is on still. There we go.
Got it?
Clock starts. You're fine. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. I think if we're going to be really serious about affordable housing and identifying ways to deal with people who are homeless and houseless, I agree with some of the strategies that PBA put in their housing report. The demand for housing definitely has outpaced the supply. And we know that when supply does not meet the demand, prices of homes, they skyrocket. And I'm pleased that HB 2001 was passed and signed into law by Governor Brown last year. In a city like ours, I believe the requirement of allowing the permitting of duplex, triplex, quadruplex, detached cottage clusters in areas currently zoned for single dwellings are going to be one of our ways that we deal with the density issues in the city of Portland, particularly if we're not going to move back the urban growth boundary. I think we need to expand our housing options by providing more flexibility for numbers of units with new incentives and affordability for people who actually can pay for this. We talk about affordable housing and we put what we call affordable housing on the market, but it is truly not affordable to working class people in this city, and particularly folks who live past 82nd, where east of 82nd, where the average salary is under $50,000 a year. So as I'm talking about building houses, expanding bike lanes, I'm going to be talking about building sidewalks out in East County. That's where I live at, to make sure that the people who live in that area, that they get an opportunity to help create policies and to direct resources that are really going to have a huge impact on their lives. The other issue is, I think we need to take one of Metro's programs, like the TOD program, and leverage that with the City of Portland's program for brownfields. We have over 1,200 brownfields in the City of Portland. If we leverage different governments' money to put, mixed use housing, business projects online, we can build those faster than we can from building projects from the ground up. And it is just unconscionable to know that it takes us between 5 to 7 years to build housing with pre-development, permitting, design review. We have to have time out on that. We have to reduce that plan. So the other thing that I want to do is I want to streamline the permitting process. So as you're coming through housing, you can also get someone to get your permit approved through the Water Bureau, through Environmental Services, so that there is a one-stop shopping place that you don't get hung up in the system of bureaucratic silos at the City of Portland. And I see that as a big option, because we can't, right now, the way the system is set up, you cannot build your way out of this crisis. We're going to have to really think bolder and more creative about how we partner as governments. And I think with my experience on the local level, the federal level, and at the state level, this is going to be something that's very important when we're picking our next city council person.
Great, thank you. And we'll finish this question with Cynthia Castro.
Thank you, John. So the city has delivered on developing more affordable housing and permanent supportive housing for the chronically homeless. The challenge is not being able to scale to meet demand, and that's what my fellow candidates have been saying as well. I support continued production of affordable housing and permanent supportive housing, as well as the preservation of existing affordable housing. I also think with more construction opportunities coming online, that the city has the opportunity to invest in minority women, emerging small businesses, as well, to build their capital so that they can be more competitive in construction bidding. And I also agree that we need to look at streamlining our processes. Our bureaucracy layers, end up slowing things down. The City of Portland also needs to invest in more resources to help Portlanders stay housed. I support increasing short-term rental assistance and home ownership programs. I also believe that city planning and capital projects also need to, as a standard practice, consider anti-displacement. So as we're seeing with the residential infill project, there's a lot of conversation around what proactive strategies can we take around displacement that we anticipate might happen because of these policies. With the Southwest Corridor project, you're also seeing that housing equity strategy as well. Again, like as we're building large infrastructure through that area, the anticipation of potentially displacing the communities who we want to actually benefit from this new capital investment. People experiencing homelessness, including those living on the streets or living with extended family and friends, should also have their voices heard and be at the table when the city's talking about homelessness. During the City Club Forum, candidate forum that I participated in a couple weeks ago, we actually did have a live viewer who identified as houseless who asked that very question. How can my voice be heard at the table when we're talking about myself and my situation? So I definitely believe in more access to being able to participate in those conversations and finding solutions together. I'm proud that the city passed the $15 per hour minimum wage a few years ago. However, we need to continue adjusting wages to keep up with inflation. We've seen through the COVID-19 crisis just how economically vulnerable many of our community members are. So those are some of the things that I would bring to the table. You also asked about the Here Together measure, and I certainly support that.
Great, thank you all for those very thorough answers. Okay, next we're going to ask about economic recovery, and we'll start this question with Loretta Smith. As Oregon responds to the COVID-19 outbreak and efforts to continue flattening the curve, a major impact, as we all know, has been the significant downturn of the economy. I think we saw today there's a 4.8% decline in the first quarter.
Right.
This year. As you likely already know, both small businesses and businesses of color have been disproportionately impacted by this downturn, and supportive resources are exhausted within minutes of opening. What are some ways the Portland City Council can support small businesses and minority-owned businesses during and after this crisis? Are there programs already in place or in development that you would advocate for?
Well, at this point, we are in a pandemic where everyone's resources have been dwindled, and the city of Portland has basically said that they're, $100 million in the hole, not knowing exactly how much money that we need to survive. First of all, we have to take care of core services for the city of Portland first. Secondly, we have to do everything that we can possibly do, because right now we have $66 to $88 million in the emergency reserves. So we are going to have to be very prickly about how we utilize those resources. But if I had to take a first splash at this, I would actually say, look, City of Portland is made up of small businesses. In order for this economy in this pandemic era to go forward, we have to give small businesses those kinds of resources to make sure that they're maintaining. And at the same time, leveraging programs like the PPP from the SBA and emergency dollars that actually come in from the federal government. I believe I would be strongly supporting a fifth stimulus specifically for local and state governments. Without that, we're not going to be able to survive. Now, the state, they have a $2.5 billion rainy day pot. How they're going to use that, and if it's going to be just used for state services or for local services, we have to figure that out. But I'd also be asking about how can we tap into that $2.5 billion rainy day pot to make sure that small businesses are actually able to run and survive and to thrive. The last thing, John, for me, watching this whole thing unfold, I've noticed that there is a can-do attitude amongst people here in Portland. And I think together, knowing that their elected leaders are very supportive of them, that we can get through this pandemic even better than we were before.
Great, thank you. Cynthia Castro.
So first, we're dealing with something that we've never seen before. So we're still operating under a lot of uncertainty. One of the most important things that we can continue to do is minimize the spread of the coronavirus by encouraging adherence to the governor's social distancing orders and public health guidelines. Oregon State Health Officer recently stated that social distancing has prevented an estimated 70,000 people in Oregon from being infected by COVID. That's something that we definitely should be proud of, but we can't let up. Like you mentioned, John, I've been following the grants and relief funds that have been coming available for small businesses. And like you said, they're definitely maxed out. So the city of Portland received $114 million from the US Treasury through the CARES Act, but still waiting for guidelines about how these funds can be spent. I definitely would advocate that these be spent towards supporting our small businesses, which make up approximately 80% of PBA's membership, and be given directly towards households that have been impacted to help with paying for rent and buying food. Economic recovery also includes continued partnership, and I'm eager to learn about recommendations from the Economic Recovery Task Force. I've not been part of those conversations, but I know that they are working together, again, to find out, how do we move forward and rebuild our economy. And Prosper has indicated they're providing some technical assistance to businesses to help them adapt their operations, such as going digital. which, you know, I interact with small business owners, and I know that that's something that they're also looking to do. Again, we're operating under unusual circumstances, so how can our small businesses continue to be viable as much as possible through this, while also continuing to adhere to those public health guidelines? But those are things that we're going to need beyond this economic, pandemic as well, is that continued technical assistance. Before COVID, I was invited to participate in Hacienda CDC small business, lunch or breakfast and conversation, and we were talking about how difficult it is, even without a pandemic in place, how difficult it is for small businesses to remain viable after those first few years. So I really see the city and Prosper Portland being in a position to provide even greater support to small businesses afterwards. When it comes to the city of Portland, you know, we employ almost 8,000 people, and the CARES Act funds cannot be used for the city's revenue loss, which is currently expected to be somewhere around $100 million. So the city has taken some steps to reduce expenses, such as cutting 950 jobs, which were mostly seasonal park positions. As a current City of Portland employee and a non-represented employee, I was one that received notice that we would have to be taking 10 furlough days. And, you know, we've already had conversations about hiring freezes and limiting spending, which are typical measures that we take. But again, as commissioner, I know that there'll be more difficult conversations that are going to be coming in the months to come, because like I mentioned, we do have that expected $100 million revenue loss. We do have the reserve fund, and so I'm definitely interested in how can we activate some of those resources too.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. Sam Chase. You're still on mute.
Thank you. As we move forward, we've absolutely got to put stimulating our economy and rebuilding through and as this pandemic continues as a priority. Otherwise, we can't continue to pay for the city services that we need. We need to look at across the board cuts and then prioritize the things that are really business facing and that are addressing our homelessness and housing and people who are really going to be struggling from this pandemic, and then the things that are going to rebuild and stimulate our economy. We are not, and it means also tapping every resource we possibly can from the feds, making sure that we're claiming every emergency dollar, every stimulus dollar from the package, every dollar that we can from the state, and dedicating our staff time, putting other priorities on hold, and while we prioritize their time to identify and pursue those resources. But we're not going to get the feds. Let's face it, the feds are not going to save us, and we have to make sure that we're acting as well, really assertively on our own. The small business assistance and providing technical assistance for small business to access all of those resources is critical. When we prioritize the services and programs that we can provide for the city, I'll tell you something that I am cautious about, which is when we put out a RFP for small business that we can fund 200 business with some support, and 11,000 applications come in. That is an incredible amount of work for those small businesses when you add up all of the hours for 11,000 applications, and then to process them all. So that is not, we have to be targeted in how we're doing it. And I think part of it is targeting culturally specific communities that are getting hit the hardest with our resources, but we have to be smarter about how we're administering those dollars. And I know we're trying to respond quickly, and there's good intents behind it, but we've still got work to do on that front. And then we need to really look, as we're going through a process of identifying priorities for the city, what are the business facing priorities? What are the social safety net priorities? And what are the things that are absolutely critical to the long-term sustainability of our economy, but have to be put on hold for some period of time? Things like restoring our, absolute gem, Portland Parks, is an example of something that we have to build a long-term strategy and keep that in mind as we're going. But we have to front load the things that are going to get our economy stimulated and take care of people who are struggling the most right now. We need to be very engaged in the bureaus when they put forward things that they want to cut, because we have to be careful that they're not putting forward those most politically sensitive things or the things that are going to be, the most likely to get a lot of resistance to cutting. There are programs that when you dig deep, you can find. At Metro, I found a program that was 50% admin. I changed that program to 20%, and it across the board throughout Metro was implemented by a number of other programs. So we can, when we're assertive and we're engaged at the level of where the cuts are actually happening, and help spelling out and looking at a menu of areas where we can really cut back. I think we can be more efficient in the way that we're doing it.
Okay, thanks. And we're actually going to talk a little bit more about that. That you got into our next question, which is about budgets. So each of you will be able to continue to sort of stay on the same themes here. As was just noted, the city's announced it estimates about a $100 million budget. And I can't think of anything that's changed more since when all of you made the bold decision to run for city council versus now, where you'll be coming onto a council that will have to face budget cuts. If you could just talk to us about your experience managing government budgets, your experience managing budget cuts, how you'll prioritize, how you'll make decisions. Give us a sense of how you will work with your other councilors to manage the city's budget, both in shortfalls and in reinvestment. And with this one, we start with Cynthia Castro.
Thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, I served as the director of the Charles Jordan Community Center in North Portland. And in that role, I oversaw 8 union represented employees, over 40 seasonal employees, a budget over $1 million, community partnerships, in serving community members of all ages and income levels. As a Portland Parks and Recreation employees for 5 years, only one of those years was not a budget cut. So my very first year in the Bureau, it was actually a stabilization year. And I was part of a wave of new hires that were coming on because the Bureau had actually had significant budget cuts in prior years, and they were just starting to rebuild their workforce again. So I know very much what it's like working within the city and facing budget cuts. With Portland Parks and Recreation, so when I was at the Charles Jordan Community Center, we were facing budget cuts. And one of the programs that was on the table was our preschool program. So I saw the toll that it took on our employees who didn't know, if they would have a job in the next fiscal year. We start registration for preschool in February. So for families to not know if they're going to have a preschool, a place for their child in the fall, but still taking that chance with the Bureau to register their child in February in hopes that the program would continue would continue. But at the same time, I know that we have to look at holistically at the entire city budget. We have to look at, essential services. And I believe Portland Parks and Recreation is an essential service and is something that should be prioritized. We're seeing that even more now. I just read a study that came out by the National Parks and Recreation Association that showed how much parks and recreation systems across the country are supporting our economy. In Oregon, it's over $2 billion with our parks and recreation systems and over 15,000 jobs. So I think it's absolutely important that Parks and Recreation continue to be part of the conversation as we're talking about economic recovery. I think about, the Japanese garden that attracts international travelers, our Rose Garden in Washington Park, Pioneer Courthouse Square, with the 2014 Parks Replacement Bond that I worked on. I think about the investment that we made in the infrastructure at Portland, at the Pioneer Courthouse Square, and what impact would there have been to the tenants there if we were unable to make sure that infrastructure continued to be safe. So it's going to be, again, hard decisions are going to have to be made. It's going to be collaboration, talking to the different council members, talking with the bureaus, other stakeholders, and really lifting up what are our values and what do we need to continue to invest in.
Okay, thank you. Sam Chase, your turn.
Thank you. I was Nick Fish's chief of staff in 2008. And, I will just say this about Nick Fish also, which is I learned a tremendous amount from him about collaborating and working as a team and really seeking council consensus wherever we can. And I think we all need to really be working carefully together as a council and approaching these issues. And went through that process in 2008 with Nick Fish. And we have to be so I would have a process where we have across the board, we ask for across the board cuts from our bureaus. And then we really ask for a menu of options in those across the board cuts, because we have to be very careful not to get into a game of the most politically popular things are being put forward, the things that are the hardest to say no to, and the calculations that can occur by good people. It's just natural human behavior to do that. We have to be, it's our job to make the difficult decisions about and looking with an outside the bubble perspective into those bureaus' budgets, and really identifying the things that we can put off for some period of time and cut back on until we have an opportunity to rebuild. So then it's about prioritizing the things that are safety net priorities, that are going to get living wage jobs back, that are going to support small business and get our economy going again. And what are those out-facing things that we need to be really moving forward? How can we make sure that we're supporting the building of our affordable housing and the development of the supply of housing? How can we be making sure that we're giving as much relief as we can to small business or the programs where we do have technical assistance and support? So that to me is a critical priority. And then rebuild. And then what are some of the long-term things that we really need to look at? And absolutely, has always been one of my very highest priorities to get our park system going and sustained, like a system like Tualatin Parks and Rec, where there's a long-term sustainable budget that they can rely and depend on. It's going to take some time for us to get there. And we also need to look at the things like the P5, the Schnitz, the Keller, the Newmark Theater. The city owns those. They are troubled properties. They are having difficulty year after year, hobbling along. And we have to look at a long-term strategy to sustain those over time. So at the same time that we're doing some cutting and focusing on the business-facing and safety net programs, we are going to have to make difficult short-term decisions on others. But we also need to do the long-term strategic planning so that we're making decisions that will allow us to sustain and rebuild those as well. But it might take a couple years to get where we need to on those. And we've got to bring back a part of stimulating our economy, bring back our tourism economy. And yes, all of these quality of life factors, like our parks, are part of that. We've got to get folks back. I'm really proud of the leadership and that I provided championing the Convention Center Hotel. That is going to help us get conventions back more quickly than we otherwise would be. And people don't realize that center pays its full freight on property taxes for schools, human services. So we need to keep that factor, the convention economy going, tourism, getting back to Portland as quickly as we can.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Okay, and Loretta Smith.
Thank you. I was thinking about this, John. Before I got on the call, I had to make payroll for my own business. I have a small business, a PR firm, and I had to actually cut my salary in order to meet payroll today. And since I've been out of public life, I've spent about 15, 16 months trying to grow this business. And so I have such a firsthand experience about what it's like to be a small business owner and what it's like to have to pay employee taxes, employer taxes, making sure you have enough money in the budget to meet payroll. It's been really an eye-opening experience, because I thought I knew what it was like to be a small business person. And until you actually do it and have to meet payroll, it is such a daunting kind of activity. And it really brings home what's happened to a lot of our small businesses here during this pandemic. And the first thing that I would do, I would stop COLAs for all of our employees. I would freeze hiring and I would stop the travel first. Then I would look and see, where is our debt service? When do we have millions of dollars falling off of debt service in the next 5 years? Because if that's the case, then we would hold off on that money just to maintain workers to be able to work at the city. And then I would, first day back, I would bring stakeholders from the nonprofit and the business and philanthropic communities together to identify ways in which we could leverage each other's money. I don't buy into that fact that everybody's going to have to take a cross the board cut, because if you do that, you're going to really cut those programs that that impact communities of color, low income communities, and small business. I know that small business is so important that we need to keep our eye on the ball when we're talking about small business. We have faced challenges that no other group have faced during this pandemic and during this economic downturn. So the current situation for me has placed small business owners in a dire situation. And I think small businesses are the heart and the soul of every community, particularly here in Portland. And I know that we employ over half of Oregon's private workforce. And when we struggle, so do the communities that we serve. And I know that in a recent survey of nearly 1,000 small businesses across the state, almost 80% reported revenue loss of $5,000 or more. And if that's the case, we're expected to lose more than $4.8 million just with those folks who actually filled out that survey. I like the strategy that Prosper Portland used to try to put dollars into small business hands. It wasn't enough. It was just a drop in the bucket to how big and huge the problem is. When you put out something like that, you have to be a little bit more deliberate, and you have to figure out how to cut the pie a little bit smaller so that those who are most vulnerable, that they get those resources. So I'm coming from a small business owner, from a small plex owner. I think we need to do rent forgiveness, but we also need to do mortgage forgiveness for landlords who actually are housing folks who can't afford to pay their rent. And so when we're having that conversation, we also need to make sure that we're talking about those landlords and those homeowners who they're basically stuck with mortgages that they're going to go bankrupt. And I will be a voice for that community, making sure that people understand that this is not just like a big TARP giveaway, that small businesses actually, they're the engine to this community. And if we don't support them in an effective way, in a very thoughtful way, then we're going to lose. We're going to lose a lot of small businesses that we had before the pandemic going forward. And on my watch, that's not what I plan to have happen to my city that I love.
Okay, thank you so much for those great answers. We are right on schedule, and we're gonna, this is the final question, and will serve as a closing statement for each of you, 2 minutes. So as we've mentioned here, this is a special election to replace the late Commissioner Nick Fish, who was hailed as a true public servant and the member of the council who frequently played the role of bringing opposing sides together to reach compromise to make progress. And so what we'd like you to do is just close by giving us your perspective on leadership and why you believe you will be successful in making progress as a city commissioner. Why are you the right person to replace Commissioner Fish on the council? And we'll start with closing statements from Sam Chase.
Thank you. I think the leadership and collaboration has been a central kind of a priority for me, and something I've really developed and learned and gained a lot of experience. First as Nick Fish's chief of staff, and then now in my 8th year at Metro Council. And it's really been about bringing forward and being willing to bring forward ideas, good ideas and creative strategies that will really address our biggest challenges at an economy of scale. it can be kind of sometimes a lonely place. When I first got to Metro Council, I was really adamant that we had to have a strategy, a growth strategy to address poverty and living wage jobs and equity. And there was really not a lot of support at the time. And it took a couple of years to persuade Metro Council and the region to move forward on an affordable housing strategy, and was able to do that, and was able to do it in a way that got a lot of the people who had been vociferous opponents of affordable housing on board. And so I'm proud that I have support from a broad range of, the Clackamas County Chair, Mayor of Hillsborough, Mayor of Beaverton, but also, incredible advocates like Art Rios, who is a very staunch homeless advocate, and a broad range of folks in the community that support me for this, Deborah Kafori, Barbara Roberts, Lynn Peterson. So I've been able to generate support from a broad range of folks. Similarly, brought forward a proposal to put low-income fares in place for our transit system, was able to persuade, of course it took a couple of years to do it, was able to persuade Metro Council and TriMet to move forward with a plan, and it's now in place. So I'm able to get big things done at an economy of scale that really, truly make a difference. Getting the Convention Center Hotel, after many, many attempts over tens of years, was able to get that through and play a very significant role in that. And I just want to share that I am really committed to addressing our chronic homelessness. I so appreciate Portland Business Alliance participation in the Homeless Service Initiative. As a teenager, I lost my father to mental illness and drug addiction, and I've seen what it does to a family. I've seen what it does to an individual, and folks are not going to address that those big challenges living on the street. We have to get folks off of our streets and into housing, into shelter, with supports that will help them stay off the streets and be successful. We need to pair that with street response and other programs that partner with the police in a way that puts medics and peer specialists on the front line where we can, to be even more successful in helping guide folks into that housing and other services. I am really proud of the support I have from organizations like Apano, the Oregonian, the other folks that I mentioned. I hope that you'll learn more and see my housing plan and more about why I'm running, and at Sam Chase for Portland.com. And I hope to have your ballots are in the mail. And so I hope to have your support when you vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Loretta Smith.
Thank you. I'm going to close with this. I've been a county commissioner for 8 years, balanced a $2 billion budget. Over those 8 years, I put in my own programs in the budget that are in permanent budget right now that helped low-income communities of color, where we have gathered a coalition of NAIA, SEI, IRCO, Latino Network, to make sure that we're working with our youth who are most at risk and vulnerable, and their families. That is still in the budget, and I still want to make sure that those programs, like the Summer Works program, we had no summer jobs program for kids of color who were in poverty before I got there. After I left, we began with 25, and when I left that program with 650 jobs that we pay for kids who need a pathway to success, and that program is still going. There is no candidate in this race who has the kind of experience or the track record of me working in coalition with communities of color and with local governments. For this same program, I went to the federal government to try to find extended funding sources so that kids of color could graduate from high school at the same rate as everyone else. That program came through. We tried 3 times for it and finally got it in 2018. We brought in more money to the tune of $30 million from the feds to make sure that our kids of color here in Portland, that they have an opportunity for success to open up their own businesses. But first, we need to get them graduated. I know what it takes. I've been one of those kids. I raised a son in this community. He went to public school and then went to the University of Washington. He also had his experience with Portland police. He was pulled over in my car for no reason. And they couldn't explain why they pulled him over. They said, well, he shouldn't have been driving. He shouldn't have been driving a car that was his mom's. So I understand what that trauma looks like, to have a kid of color have the police drive next to them and to be nervous about that. I understand what it takes to identify funding on every level of government. I have those relationships on the local, in the city, in the state level, and the federal level, to make sure that we're going to have our eyes on the ball to making sure that small businesses, that communities of color, that nonprofits, and that the city of Portland is left whole. I have the experience and the track record, and I'm not afraid. It's easy to talk about poverty, people of color, when you're in a campaign situation, but all you have to do is go back and look at somebody's record. Do they have a history, a consistent history of doing this, or is this just before an election that they start talking about, communities of color? I mean, I get offended by that. So you need to vote for someone who's going to have a real passion for doing this and making sure that it gets done, and somebody who's not going to be afraid. And I hope to gain your support and your vote for me when it's time to fill out that ballot.
Great. Thank you so much, Loretta. So we'll finish up here with Cynthia Castro.
Thank you for moderating this panel today, John. And I know you have another one coming up too. So I know we're all busy right now, so I appreciate you carving out some time to support our democracy. So I believe that I'm the candidate because I'm uniquely qualified. I'm somebody who's worked across the city on the front lines with community. Loretta just asked, are candidates, do they actually have a history of working with communities of color? Or is that just something they're saying? Is equity just a buzzword for them? It's not for me. When I worked for Portland Parks and Recreation, I oversaw a strategic plan initiative to improve our customer service to limited English proficient community members. I made sure that our staff on the ground, in our community centers, in our call centers, were connected to resources to be able to improve our service to our immigrant refugee communities. I volunteered as an immigrant and refugee girls soccer coach in East Portland through Portland Parks and Recreation's World Soccer Program. That was on my own time and not something I was being paid to do, but just something that I believed in. At the before moving to the Charles Rowan Community Center, I served as a specialist with our Teen Services Program, partnering with NAEA, SEI, POIC, Latino Network, IRCO, Rosewood Initiative, REAP Inc., to provide more activities for youth of color to keep them off the streets and engaged in pro-social activities under the supervision of caring adults. And that's something that I passionately did. And then as the director of the Charles Rowan Community Center, the Charles Rowan Community Center is situated within the new Columbia campus, formerly the Columbia Villa. And in that experience, I started a food pantry because I had learned that youth in that area were doing things like trading sex for food. And youth had started a food pantry in the neighborhood once a month. And so I decided to leverage what they were doing and be able to host a more regular food pantry. And I actually hired a youth who had helped start with that food pantry to help with mine. So I'm all about putting money in people's pocket as well, and employed a lot of youth at the Charles Rowan Community Center through our summer camps programs and other opportunities. I also have experience, so that's experience working within a bureau as well. So I know what it's like working within a city bureau. And then I have my City Hall experience as a senior policy advisor for Commissioner Fritz. I can't count how many times people who work directly in the community or work within bureaus have thanked me and said that they're so grateful that I'm there because I understand and I have that lens, that I don't just come from a political background, but that I know that I'm always centering people first. I'm always trying to connect with whatever we're doing, with the budget decisions we're making, with the policies and programs we're instituting. Are people going to be better off? In addition to that, I am a collaborator. I think that comes from my background as a competitive athlete as well as a coach. I know how to get the best out of people, how to bring people together. I'm humble enough to know what my strengths are, what my weaknesses are, and how to surround myself with people who help complement each other. That's definitely something that I successfully demonstrated when I was leading my team of over 50 employees and a very diverse team at the Charles Jordan Community Center. I'm vying for Commissioner seat 2, which was formerly occupied by Commissioner Nick Fish, and his portfolio included Portland Parks and Recreation and the Bureau of Environmental Services. Again, I have intimate knowledge working for Portland Parks and Recreation, and I've also partnered with Bureau of Environmental Services staff around workplace equity strategies and how to improve recruitment and retention of a more diverse workforce. And looking at positions like engineering, like how can we diverse our workforce within these environmental services division, as well as working with the native community to look at how we're stewarding our environment and our land. So I'm somebody that one reason why I ran is because people of color within the city of Portland have asked me to run. I've sat on our Diverse Employee Empowered Program of Portland, or DEEP Executive Committee, for the last year, and that's something I was invited to participate in. I also co-chaired and co-founded our Latinx PDX affinity group, and within Parks and Recreation, I was asked to be part of our fostering equity support team. So trust for me is everything, and also I'm somebody who can deliver, and that's why people have put their confidence in me.
Great. So thank you to all 3 of our first candidates on our first panel. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for our first session, so I just want to say thank you to Cynthia Castro, Sam Chase, Loretta Smith. Thank you so much for your thorough, excellent answers and for being with us and sharing your insights.